When I woke up on the morning of my daughter's wedding, I didn't expect to be bald. But what happened next changed everything forever. The day I had been waiting for, the day my daughter Sarah was finally getting married, was supposed to be filled with joy and celebration. I spent weeks preparing for this moment. I had chosen the perfect outfit, a soft lavender dress that I knew would complement the wedding theme. The house was filled with flowers, the scent of fresh lilies in the air. The house was buzzing with activity, my son-in-law's family, the florist, the caterers, all coming together to make Sarah's day special. I should have felt excitement, but all I could feel was a deep, gnawing anxiety. It wasn't the wedding that made me anxious, it was something deeper, something about Sarah's distance that had been growing over the years. Ever since she got engaged, things had changed. She was always busy, always rushing. I had become more of a background figure in her life. I tried not to show it, tried not to let my feelings interfere, but the truth was that I missed the days when it was just the two of us, when she would tell me everything, when we were closer. I thought to myself that maybe today, on her big day, things would be different. Maybe today, she would remember that I was here, that I still mattered. But as the day wore on, that hope began to fade. The first shock came when I stood in front of the mirror, brushing my hair, ready to get dressed. As I ran my fingers through my hair, I realized something was wrong. My scalp felt different, lighter. I looked closer. To my horror, my once thick, silver hair was now thin and patchy. The sight of it made my stomach drop. I could hardly recognize myself. How did this happen? Why hadn't I noticed it earlier? I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I'd never had a history of hair loss. My doctor had never mentioned any signs of such a thing. I tried to calm myself down. It had to be some kind of mistake, right? Maybe I was just stressed out. Maybe it was just a bad day. But the reality of the situation hit me harder as I realized I had no time to fix it. The wedding was hours away. I could feel the pressure building, the weight of the day's expectations. I rushed to find a hat, anything to cover up my bald spots. But the truth was, nothing could hide the shock of seeing myself like this. I couldn't let anyone see me like this, not today, of all days. So I did what I always did, I kept it to myself. I smiled through the pain. I pulled myself together as best as I could. I covered my head and went to the wedding, pretending everything was fine, pretending I wasn't falling apart inside. As I watched Sarah walk down the aisle, looking so beautiful, I wanted to be happy for her. But all I could think about was how different things had become between us. She didn't even glance in my direction as she passed. I forced myself to be happy for her, but it was hard. All I could feel was a deep sense of loss, a loss of the closeness we once shared. The wedding ceremony was beautiful, the reception was lively, but something was missing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't really part of it. When the reception was in full swing, Sarah pulled me aside. She smiled at me, but it didn't feel real. There was something in her eyes that made me uneasy. "Mom, you look great," she said, but her voice sounded off, like she was just going through the motions. I wanted to believe her, but the way she said it made me wonder. Was she really happy to see me here? Or was I just an obligation? The day dragged on, and as the night fell, I couldn't help but feel like I was invisible. I watched my daughter dance with her new husband, surrounded by friends and family, and it hit me all over again. I was no longer the center of her world. But what happened next was even more shocking. When the wedding was over, and all the guests had gone home, I sat alone in the quiet of the empty hall. I thought about everything that had happened, everything that had been left unsaid. And that's when I made the decision. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I was done hiding. I was done being the background figure in my own life. That's when I decided to tell Sarah the truth about why I had been hiding my hair loss, the truth about what had been happening behind the scenes. It was time to stop holding back. What I revealed next would change everything, forever. As I sat alone in the quiet aftermath of my daughter's wedding, I couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness settle in my chest. The sounds of laughter and clinking glasses were gone, replaced by the cold silence of an empty house. The night had been beautiful, of course, but it wasn't the wedding that had left a lasting impression on me. No, it was the way I had felt so invisible, so distant from the people I had once been closest to. My own daughter barely glanced at me as she danced with her new husband, and I couldn't help but feel that same cold distance I'd been sensing for months. Sarah was happy, of course, she had every right to be. But what about me? Where did I fit in anymore? What had happened to the bond we once shared? I couldn't shake the feeling that I had become an afterthought in her life. She had always been so busy, so preoccupied with her own world, and I had tried to be understanding, tried to respect her independence. But on her wedding day, when I should have felt like a valued part of her life, I felt like a stranger in my own family. I glanced over at the empty table where my husband and I had once sat, sharing quiet meals, laughing, and talking about our plans for the future. Those days felt like a lifetime ago, and I couldn't help but feel that loss weighing on me more than ever. But this feeling of being ignored by my own daughter, was something I hadn't expected. It was something I didn't know how to handle. For a moment, I thought about leaving, about packing my things and walking out the door. I could hear my daughter's laughter echoing in the next room, and it felt like a cruel reminder of how little I mattered in her life now. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. I had been a part of this family for so long, and despite everything, I still loved Sarah. I loved her more than I had ever been able to express. But love was no longer enough. It never had been. I had always been the one to make excuses for her, to let her off the hook when she was distant or cold. I had made myself small, trying to fit into a life that was no longer mine. But not anymore. I was tired of being invisible. I was tired of sacrificing my own needs and desires for a family that didn't seem to notice. I could feel something changing within me, a shift that I hadn't expected, but one that felt inevitable. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. As I sat in the silence of my home, the reality of what I needed to do began to settle in. I needed to confront Sarah. I needed to tell her how I felt, how I had been feeling for months, maybe even years. I couldn't keep this bottled up inside anymore. It was time for me to stop hiding, to stop being the person everyone expected me to be. It was time for me to be myself. I had given so much of myself to this family, but now it was my turn to take something back. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady as I made my way to the mirror. I studied my reflection, taking in the thin, patchy hair that had been such a shock earlier in the day. I had always taken pride in my appearance, but now I was faced with the reality that I couldn't control everything. I couldn't control how Sarah treated me, I couldn't control how my family saw me, and I certainly couldn't control the way my body was changing. But I could control how I reacted. I could control how I chose to move forward. And in that moment, I made a decision. I would confront Sarah, but not with anger or bitterness. No, I would confront her with the truth. I would tell her how I had been feeling all this time, how I had been slowly fading into the background of her life. It was time for her to see me, to understand the depth of what I had been going through. It wasn't about trying to guilt her or make her feel bad. It was about taking back control of my life. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope, a spark of something new and powerful deep inside me. I was ready to face whatever came next, no matter how difficult it might be. I was ready to stop hiding and start living again. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in a long time. The quiet of the house seemed different now, more oppressive, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I hadn't slept well the night before, but the events of the wedding had pushed me into a new mindset. The shame, the frustration, the sense of being overlooked, they had all built up inside me, and I could feel that something had to give. I spent the morning doing what I always did, preparing breakfast, making the bed, tidying up the house. It was my routine, my way of keeping things in order. But this time, something was different. I wasn't doing it just because I had to, I was doing it because I wanted to feel in control of something, anything. As I moved through the house, I kept thinking about what had happened at the wedding. The way Sarah had barely acknowledged me, the cold distance in her eyes, the absence of any real connection. It was as if I was just a guest at my own daughter's celebration, someone who didn't really belong. And it hurt. It hurt more than I had expected. I had spent so many years building a life around my family, around Sarah, and now it seemed like all that effort had been in vain. I had given so much of myself to them, and yet, it felt like they didn't even see me anymore. As I set the table for breakfast, I could hear the sounds of the neighborhood outside, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional bark of a dog, the soft murmur of people going about their day. But in here, in this house, it was like time had frozen. I was caught between the past and the present, trying to make sense of what had changed, trying to understand how we had arrived at this point. My mind wandered back to Sarah's wedding, to the moment when I had felt so out of place. It was supposed to be a happy day, a day to celebrate the union of two people I loved. But instead of joy, I felt like an outsider, like I had no real place in the life I had helped build. And that's when it hit me, I had allowed this to happen. I had allowed myself to be pushed to the sidelines, to be forgotten in favor of everything and everyone else. I had spent so many years being the caretaker, the listener, the person everyone relied on. But who was I, really? What had I done for myself? I stood in the kitchen, staring at the breakfast I had prepared. The eggs, the toast, the coffee, it all seemed so insignificant now. I felt like a ghost in my own home, watching life go by without really being part of it. It wasn't just Sarah. It was all of them, of my family, my friends, even the neighbors. Everyone had moved on, and I was left behind, holding on to the remnants of a life that no longer existed. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay, that I was okay. I wasn't okay. I was tired of being the person everyone expected me to be. I needed to take back control, to reclaim my place in the world. And the first step was talking to Sarah. It was time to stop holding back, to stop hiding behind the facade of being the understanding mother. It was time for her to see me, really see me, for the first time in a long while. I walked over to the phone and picked it up. My hands were steady, but inside, my heart was racing. I dialed Sarah's number and waited as the phone rang. When she answered, her voice sounded cheerful, almost too cheerful. "Mom, how are you?" she asked. I paused for a moment, taking in her words. How was I? That was the question, wasn't it? How had I been? I took a deep breath. "We need to talk," I said, my voice calm but firm. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Talk about what?" Sarah asked, sounding confused. "About you, about me, about everything that's been happening," I replied. Another pause, and then, finally, she spoke. "Okay, Mom. I'm listening." That was all I needed to hear. I had her attention. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over something in my life. It was time to face the truth. It was time to stop hiding behind the walls I had built for so many years. I was ready to be seen, to be heard, and to reclaim my place in this world. The conversation we had that day would change everything. It was the moment when I stopped being invisible, the moment when I took back my power. As the days passed after our conversation, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. Sarah had agreed to meet me, and that was a start. But I couldn't help but feel a knot tighten in my stomach whenever I thought about what I was about to say. The house felt different now, quieter somehow, like the air itself was holding its breath. I had spent so many years trying to be the perfect mother, the perfect wife, always sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of everyone else. But now, in the silence, I realized I had neglected one very important person, myself. I wasn't sure how this conversation with Sarah would go. Would she listen? Would she understand? Or would it be just another one of those moments where she brushed me off, pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't? I couldn't let that happen. I had to speak my truth. So, I waited. The following afternoon, I met Sarah at a small cafe we used to visit together. It was a quiet place, the kind of place where you could hear yourself think, where the world seemed to slow down. When I saw her walk in, my heart skipped a beat. She looked beautiful, as always, but there was something different about her. Her usual warmth seemed to be missing, replaced by a guarded expression. I stood up to greet her, but she barely made eye contact. We sat down, and the silence stretched between us, heavy and thick. I didn't know where to start. The truth felt so raw, so vulnerable. But I couldn't keep it inside anymore. I couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine. "Sarah," I began, my voice steady but soft, "I've been thinking a lot about the wedding. About how I felt, how I've been feeling for a while now." She nodded, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. "I know," she said quietly. "I've noticed you've been distant." I swallowed hard. This was it. "It's not just about the wedding, sweetheart," I said. "It's about everything. I feel like I've been fading into the background of your life. Like I don't matter anymore." I could see her flinch, just slightly, but she didn't interrupt. "I know I've been the one to always hold things together. I've always been the one to support you, to put everyone else first. But I've lost myself in the process. And I can't do that anymore." The words felt freeing as they left my mouth, but they also felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Sarah's eyes softened, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a glimpse of the daughter I had once known. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said, her voice trembling. "I never meant to make you feel that way. I've been so caught up in my own world, I didn't realize how much you were hurting." I felt a mix of relief and sadness wash over me. Part of me wanted to cry, to release all the pain I had been holding in for so long, but I stayed composed. This was a moment of healing, not a moment of weakness. "I know you've had your own struggles, Sarah," I said, my voice softer now. "But I need you to understand that I'm still here. I'm still your mother. And I deserve to be seen, to be heard, just like anyone else." She nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "I've been selfish," she admitted. "I've taken you for granted, and I didn't even realize it." The air between us shifted, the tension slowly beginning to lift. I had always known that Sarah had the capacity for empathy, but I hadn't known how much it would mean to hear her acknowledge my pain. It wasn't about blaming her, but about finally being honest with each other. "I just want you to know, Sarah," I continued, "that I'm not asking for anything other than respect. I'm not asking for perfection, just for us to be able to talk, to really be there for each other, like we used to." She wiped her eyes, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what happened to us, Mom. But I want to fix it. I want us to be close again." I smiled, a small, genuine smile. It wasn't fixed, not yet, but it was a start. The road ahead would be long, and there would be bumps along the way. But at that moment, I felt something shift between us. A connection that had been broken was starting to heal. As we sat there, talking for the first time in what felt like forever, I realized that sometimes the hardest conversations are the ones that bring the most change. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful for the future. Maybe we could rebuild what had been lost, piece by piece. But this time, I wouldn't be invisible. This time, I would make sure of it. As the days went by, I felt a subtle shift in the air between Sarah and me. The conversation we had in the cafe seemed to have opened a door, one that had been locked for so long. There was a tentative hope now, a quiet understanding that had been missing for years. But hope was delicate, and I knew better than to expect everything to be perfect right away. Our relationship needed time, and so did I. I started taking small steps for myself, things I had put off for too long. I signed up for a yoga class, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. I joined a book club at the local library, meeting people outside of my family for the first time in ages. It wasn't about filling the void left by Sarah's absence, it was about finding parts of me I had forgotten. But there were still moments when the weight of it all would come crashing down on me. Late at night, when the house was still and everyone else was asleep, I would find myself lying awake, thinking. I thought about my late husband, about the life we had built together. I thought about the years I had spent raising my children, giving them everything I had. And then I thought about how easily it all seemed to slip away. I had worked so hard to be the perfect mother, the perfect wife, the perfect daughter. And yet, here I was, feeling like a stranger in my own home. But every day, I tried to remind myself that this was not the end. This was a new chapter, and I was learning to write it. As I was taking these small steps, Sarah and I slowly began to reconnect. It wasn't always easy. There were awkward silences at first, unsure conversations where both of us were trying to figure out how to navigate this new dynamic. But there were also moments of genuine warmth, moments when it felt like we were starting to understand each other again. One evening, she invited me over to her house for dinner. It was a simple gesture, but it meant so much to me. I walked in, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw my daughter through a different lens. She was no longer the young girl who needed my constant guidance. She was an adult, with her own life, her own priorities. And yet, in that moment, I realized that I still mattered to her. She still wanted me in her life. We sat down at the table, and Sarah made small talk, asking about my yoga class, about the book I was reading. And I shared, I really did. I told her about the things I was learning, the things I was discovering about myself. It felt strange, almost surreal, to have a conversation like that with her. I was no longer the one giving advice, no longer the one offering guidance. I was simply a woman, sitting across from her daughter, both of us learning how to be together again. The dinner was quiet, simple, and filled with an unspoken understanding. Sarah listened intently, nodding along, her eyes no longer distant but present. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly being heard. That evening, as I left her house, something inside me shifted again. It wasn't a grand moment, no dramatic revelation, but there was peace in the air. I felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of optimism about the future. Sarah was not perfect, and neither was I. But we were finding our way back to each other, one step at a time. It was slow, it was painful, but it was real. And as I drove home that night, I realized something that I had missed for so long. I wasn't just a mother or a wife. I was me. And for the first time in a long time, I was starting to like the woman I was becoming. It had been a few weeks since Sarah and I had started to rebuild our relationship, and though things were better, there was still a lingering unease in the back of my mind. Every time we talked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still walking on eggshells, unsure of how much we could really share. The small gestures of reconnecting felt good, but they didn't erase the years of distance that had built up between us. I had learned to stop expecting too much too soon, but at times, the silence between us was almost deafening. I spent a lot of time reflecting on the person I had become. In the past, I had always been the one who kept everything together, the glue that held the family together. I had put everyone else's needs first, always making sure my husband and children were happy. But now, it was different. I was slowly learning how to prioritize myself, how to let go of the guilt that had always weighed so heavily on me. But that didn't mean it was easy. As much as I wanted to be independent, there were moments when the loneliness crept in. I missed the days when my life was full of laughter, full of noise. Now, the house felt too quiet, too still. I had tried to fill that silence with activities, yoga, books, walks, but there were days when it felt like nothing could fill the void. One evening, after spending the day on my own, I decided to visit Sarah. We hadn't spent much time together outside of our talks, and I wanted to see her, to see if things were really changing, or if it was just an illusion. I drove over to her house, taking in the familiar sights along the way. The neighborhood hadn't changed, but I had. I could feel the weight of the past few months in every mile I drove. When I arrived at her house, Sarah greeted me at the door with a warm smile, but there was still something guarded in her eyes. I could see that she was trying, but I could also see that she wasn't fully there yet. She invited me inside, and we sat down in the living room. It wasn't anything special, just the two of us sitting quietly, the way it had always been. But this time, it felt different. I didn't feel like the visitor. I felt like I belonged. "How's everything going?" she asked, breaking the silence. I smiled, grateful for the simple question. "It's going. Slowly, but it's going. And you?" I watched as she hesitated, her fingers tapping nervously on the arm of the chair. "It's been hard," she admitted. "I've been trying, Mom. I know I haven't been the best daughter, but I want to be. I want to be better." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had been waiting for this moment, for her to finally acknowledge the distance that had grown between us, but hearing her say it out loud made it all real. "I'm not perfect either," I said softly. "But we can work on it, Sarah. One step at a time." We talked for hours that evening, about everything and nothing. About the past, the present, and the future. It was the kind of conversation we had missed for so long, the kind that filled the empty spaces between us. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was really being heard. As I left her house that night, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace wash over me. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was enough. Enough to make me believe that things could really change. That we could really start over, even if it was slow and uncertain. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, I knew that. There would be moments of doubt, moments where we would both slip back into old patterns. But I was ready to face it. Ready to face her. Ready to face myself. I was no longer the woman I had been a few months ago, the one who was always trying to fix everyone else's problems. I was learning to live for me, to let go of the need for constant validation. And that, in itself, was the greatest gift I could give to myself. The next day, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The day ahead was just another ordinary day, but I wasn't approaching it the same way anymore. I was learning to embrace the small moments, the quiet victories. And as I sipped my coffee, I realized something: I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't just a mother, or a wife, or a daughter. I was me. And for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. The weeks that followed felt like a slow, steady progression. Sarah and I were still working through our issues, but there was a difference now, a shift, however subtle. I noticed it in the way we spoke to each other, in the way we shared moments that had once seemed so small but now felt significant. We were no longer walking on eggshells, but it wasn't perfect yet. I had my moments of doubt. There were still times when I questioned whether we could truly rebuild what had been broken. The scars were there, and I knew they would take time to heal. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what the future held. I wasn't afraid to let go of the past and move forward, even if it meant doing it slowly. Sarah had been making an effort. I could see it in the little things, the way she checked in on me more, the way she seemed genuinely interested in my life again. It wasn't enough to erase the years of distance, but it was enough to make me believe that we could find our way back to each other. One afternoon, as I was getting ready to go out, I received a message from Sarah. It was simple, just a few words: "How about dinner tomorrow night? Just us. I'll cook." I stared at the screen for a moment, feeling a warmth in my chest. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it meant so much more than that. It meant that she was willing to take the time to spend with me, that she was acknowledging the space between us and trying to bridge it. I smiled, my heart feeling lighter than it had in a long time. The next evening, I arrived at her house, a small bouquet of flowers in my hands. It wasn't much, but it felt right. When Sarah opened the door, she greeted me with a warm hug, and I could feel the sincerity in her embrace. It was a simple moment, but it spoke volumes. We went into the kitchen, where she had prepared a simple meal: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and a fresh salad. We sat down to eat, and for the first time in what felt like forever, we were just two people sharing a meal. No pretense, no expectations, just the comfort of being together. As we ate, we talked about everything and nothing. We talked about her work, about the new book I was reading, about the things we had missed in each other's lives. It was easy, effortless even. For the first time, there was no weight on the conversation, no unspoken tension. I realized that, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly part of her life again. She asked about my yoga classes, about the progress I had made in finding balance in my own life. I shared how much it had helped me, how much more at peace I felt with myself. It wasn't just about the physical benefits, it was about taking control of my own well-being. Sarah listened, really listened, and I could see that she was proud of me. That meant everything to me. After dinner, we sat in the living room, sipping tea and chatting. It wasn't the kind of conversation where you're looking for answers. It was just two people being present with each other. We didn't need to fix anything in that moment. We didn't need to solve anything. We just needed to be. As I sat there, I realized how far we had come. It hadn't been easy. There were times when I wanted to give up, when I thought it would be easier to just walk away. But I didn't. And neither did Sarah. We were both working to heal, to repair the bond that had been broken. And though it wasn't perfect, it was real. It was the beginning of something new, something that we could both grow into. As I left her house that evening, I felt a quiet sense of contentment. It wasn't the end of our journey, but it was a significant step forward. I wasn't expecting everything to be fixed overnight, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Hopeful for the future, for my relationship with Sarah, and most importantly, for myself. I had learned that healing wasn't a straight line. It was full of twists and turns, of setbacks and progress. But it was a journey worth taking. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't walking it alone. The weeks continued to pass, and though things between Sarah and I were slowly improving, I knew we were far from where we needed to be. I still found myself looking for signs that she was truly listening, that she really understood how much I had been through, but the conversations, the small steps, were slowly building something new. We were in the process of healing, but it wasn't going to happen all at once. I was still learning what it meant to take control of my life again, and every day felt like a new challenge. I had been so used to living in the shadows of others, my husband, my children, that stepping into the light felt both empowering and terrifying. There were days when I woke up and felt a surge of energy, of excitement, like I could take on the world. And then there were days when I felt like I was suffocating, when the weight of the years I had spent in silence pressed down on me harder than ever. One afternoon, I decided to visit Sarah again. I wasn't sure what prompted it, but something inside me told me that we needed to talk, that we needed to take the next step. So, I drove over to her house, my heart beating faster than usual. I hadn't expected the visit to feel so loaded, but the closer I got, the more I realized how much I still needed to say. When Sarah opened the door, she smiled at me, but there was a new warmth in her eyes, something that felt real, something that had been missing before. "Mom," she said, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in her voice. "I'm glad you're here." We sat down in the living room, the space between us no longer feeling as distant as it once had. There was still a certain formality to our interactions, a carefulness in the way we spoke to each other, but it was different from the coldness that had characterized so much of our past. "I've been thinking," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "About everything. About how I've treated you, and about the way things have been between us." Her voice trembled slightly, and I could see that she was struggling to find the right words. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that it wasn't her fault. But I also knew that she needed to say what was in her heart. "I know I've been distant," she continued, "and I know I've hurt you. But I want to make it right. I don't want to keep living like this. I don't want you to feel like you don't matter, because you do." I felt a lump form in my throat, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. She was finally seeing me, finally acknowledging the pain I had been carrying for so long. It wasn't just words. It was the sincerity in her voice, the way she was finally allowing herself to feel the weight of what had happened between us. "I know I can't take back the years we've lost," Sarah said, her voice soft, "but I want to move forward, Mom. I want us to rebuild what we had, even if it takes time. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. It wasn't the perfect solution, and I knew that there would still be bumps along the way. But it was a start. It was the beginning of something new, something that we could both work for. I want that too, I said, my voice steady but thick with emotion. I want us to be close again. I want to be a part of your life, and I want you to be a part of mine. We sat there for a while, just talking about everything and nothing, but it felt good, it felt right. It was like we were finally starting to understand each other again, to fill in the gaps that had been left empty for so long. As I left her house later that evening, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't a sudden transformation, but it was a step in the right direction. The road ahead wasn't going to be without its challenges, but for the first time, I felt like we were walking it together. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was a part of her life again, and I was beginning to realize that I didn't need to hide anymore. I could be the mother I wanted to be, and I could be the woman I had always hoped to become. And that realization, that quiet understanding, was enough to keep me moving forward, one step at a time. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself adjusting to this new reality. The relationship between Sarah and I, while far from perfect, was slowly growing. It was a different kind of bond than what I had imagined when she was younger, but it was real. The process of healing was messy, unpredictable, and at times frustrating, but it felt like something worth fighting for. I had learned not to expect perfection and to allow myself the space to make mistakes. The same went for Sarah. We were both learning, both growing. I found comfort in the small moments, a shared laugh, a conversation about nothing, a quiet understanding between us. It wasn't the grand gestures I had once hoped for, it was the quiet ones that mattered most. One evening, after dinner, Sarah and I sat on the porch, the sun setting gently in the distance. We didn't say much at first, but there was something comforting about the silence, something familiar. I had never been a woman of many words, and neither was she. But in the calm of that moment, I realized how far we had come. "You know, Mom," Sarah said, breaking the silence, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other night. About us. About everything." Her voice was steady, thoughtful. I nodded, not quite sure where this was going, but willing to listen. "I just want to make sure we don't lose this again," she continued. "I don't want to go back to the way things were, where we barely talked. I don't want you to feel like you don't matter, because you do. You always have." I felt a lump form in my throat, but I kept my composure. I had spent so many years pretending everything was fine when it wasn't, but here, in this moment, with Sarah, everything felt different. "I don't want to lose this either," I said quietly. "I'm not perfect, Sarah. I've made mistakes, and I know I've been distant at times. But I've always wanted the best for you. Always." She reached out and took my hand, her touch warm and comforting. It was the first time in a long time that I felt like we were truly connecting, not just as mother and daughter, but as two people who had been through a lot and had come out stronger. "I know, Mom," she said softly. "I know you've always tried. And I want to try too. I don't want to take you for granted anymore." We sat there for a while longer, just holding hands, watching the sun dip below the horizon. It was a simple moment, but it felt like everything was falling into place. In that stillness, I realized that healing wasn't about big changes or dramatic gestures. It was about the small, quiet moments of understanding, of being there for each other, of not giving up. I didn't need Sarah to be perfect. I didn't need her to be the person I thought she should be. I just needed her to be herself. And for the first time in a long time, I was content with that. The days ahead would still have their challenges. There would still be moments of doubt, of frustration, but I knew that we were both trying. And that was enough. I wasn't just a mother anymore, a figure in the background of my family's life. I was me. And I had learned that I didn't need to be anyone else to be loved. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with who I was. And I felt hopeful for the future, for the relationship I was rebuilding with Sarah, and for the life I was starting to build for myself. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And that was enough.